Three people in HOA uniforms showed up at Tyler's door, accusing him of breaking rules he'd never even seen. What followed next shook his world in ways he couldn't have imagined. It wasn't just a violation, it was the beginning of something far darker. What happened next will surprise even those who think they've seen it all. But let's start from the beginning. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind where everything feels settled and calm. But that peace shattered the moment Tyler opened his door. Standing there, three figures in crisp, dark uniforms, the words HOA printed sharply in white across their chests. They weren't smiling. There was no warmth in their gaze, only a cold, calculated authority. Tyler, a man in his mid-30s with an almost obsessive pride in the little home he'd worked so hard for, stood frozen. He could feel his pulse quicken as they started talking, the words like daggers. They claimed his flower beds, a carefully arranged part of his garden that had taken weeks to perfect, violated community rules. The problem? No one had ever told him what those rules were. They were now pulling out a stack of papers, each one marked with the weight of their power, ready to make demands he didn't understand. For a moment, Tyler felt like he was losing his grip on reality. He had spent years turning this house into his sanctuary. Every corner of it spoke of his dedication, his care. And now, these strangers, these so-called officers, were threatening to tear it apart over something as trivial as flower placement. They weren't there to help, to discuss, or even to offer solutions. They were there to control, to impose, to force him into submission. Tyler's throat tightened. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, but they didn't flinch. One of them stepped forward, pushing the papers into his hands, the weight of them somehow making everything feel so much heavier. The words on the page were meaningless to him. His mind refused to process the absurdity. But the threat? That hit hard. His stomach churned with disbelief. His home, his pride, was under siege. How could this be happening? How could something this small, this petty, spiral into something so much bigger? But that was only the beginning. Tyler didn't know it yet, but the worst was yet to come. The truth behind their visit was far darker than he could have imagined. The so-called officers didn't back down. Every word they spoke carried the weight of their supposed authority, and their threats grew more severe with each encounter. Tyler was told in no uncertain terms that they could fine him into oblivion or even seize his property if he didn't bow to their demands. His every challenge was met with mockery, as if his protests were nothing more than an annoyance to them. They reveled in his frustration, delighting in the control they held over his life. The injustice of it all gnawed at him. The more Tyler tried to push back, the more the officers dug in their heels, taunting him with their power. They appeared to take pleasure in the discomfort they caused, as though the very act of tormenting him gave them a sense of purpose. It didn't matter that their actions were baseless, without any legal standing. Tyler quickly realized they didn't care about right or wrong. They thrived on the power trip they had created, feeding off the fear and helplessness they saw in him. Days turned into a blur of harassment, petty demands, and empty threats. Tyler, a man who had once felt secure in his own home, began to feel like a stranger in it. They weren't just trying to force him to follow some ridiculous rule. They were tearing apart the very foundation of his peace, and they didn't even seem to notice or care. It wasn't about flowers anymore. It was about control. He dug deeper into the so-called HOA officers. What he uncovered only fueled his fury. They weren't real officers, nor did they have any true legal authority. They were nothing more than hired goons, playing a game with people's lives, hiding behind a system that had been corrupted beyond recognition. They were little more than bullies, exploiting a process that was meant to foster community, not divide it. And in the process, they had crossed a line, one that Tyler couldn't ignore. The anger inside him grew. It wasn't just about the flowers anymore. It wasn't even about the petty rules they tried to impose. It was about the misuse of power, the injustice that rotted beneath the surface. They thought they could break him, but in truth, they had already awakened something far more dangerous: his resolve to fight back. Tyler wasn't going to take this lying down. Each encounter with the so-called HOA officers pushed him further into a corner. But instead of retreating, something inside him snapped. The anger that had simmered beneath the surface now boiled over, a seething force he could no longer control. He wasn't going to let these imposters ruin his life without a fight. Determined to find a way out, Tyler threw himself into researching HOA regulations. Every free moment was spent reading, consulting legal advice, and piecing together the puzzle. The more he uncovered, the clearer it became. What these officers were doing was not only immoral, it was illegal. They had no legal standing, no right to impose fines, and certainly no authority to seize his property. It was a scam, a fraudulent act masked as bureaucracy. Armed with this knowledge, Tyler felt a surge of confidence. His anger was no longer just a reaction. It was a weapon. It was time to confront these pretenders head-on. The next time they showed up at his door, demanding compliance, Tyler stood tall. He told them in no uncertain terms to leave. He wasn't going to let them walk all over him any longer. The officers scoffed at him, dismissing his challenge as nothing more than a nuisance. They were arrogant, dismissing his research as irrelevant. "Your case is hopeless," one of them sneered. "We'll be back to finish what we started." But Tyler wasn't intimidated. Not anymore. With his newfound resolve, Tyler didn't stop there. He filed complaints, documenting their fraudulent actions and exposing them for the con artists they were. Word spread quickly, and soon his neighbors, many of whom had been targeted by the same officers, rallied behind him. The community that had once been passive began to wake up. They weren't going to let these imposters continue to prey on them. Tyler had sparked something larger than himself. The fight wasn't just about his house anymore. It was about standing up against the abuse of power, and with each passing day, his cause grew stronger. He wasn't going to back down, and this time, the officers would learn that their reign of terror was coming to an end. Tyler's relentless pursuit of justice had finally paid off. The weeks of frustration, anger, and sleepless nights had all led to this moment. The fake officers, once so confident in their power, were now on the defensive. After relentless pressure and mounting evidence, their illegal activities were finally exposed. The HOA's higher-ups had no choice but to step in and conduct a full investigation. It didn't take long for the truth to come to light. The entire fraudulent operation was shut down, its corrupt foundation crumbling under the weight of its own lies. Tyler's heart raced as he watched the officers, the same ones who had tormented him, being arrested for their fraudulent actions. Their smug faces, once filled with arrogant certainty, were now masked with fear and disbelief as they were led away in cuffs. The charges against them were severe, criminal charges stemming from their fake claims, their attempts to rob people of their homes, their abuse of power. For the first time in what felt like forever, Tyler felt a sense of relief wash over him. The storm that had been raging inside him, the tension that had built up over the weeks, began to dissipate. Justice had been served. It wasn't just about the officers' arrests. It was about the principle. Tyler had stood up against a corrupt system, one that was designed to oppress, not protect. And in the end, he had won. The sense of satisfaction was almost overwhelming. To see the same individuals who had once walked into his home with authority now dragged away in disgrace was a feeling Tyler could hardly put into words. His house, his sanctuary, was safe again. The thought of it, the overwhelming relief that came with the knowledge that no one could threaten it anymore, was a victory beyond measure. Tyler had faced down the storm and emerged victorious.